Hi everyone, and welcome to our next maths lesson. Today we are looking at multiples of 10, 100 and 1000, and you'll see again that our words of the day are place value because they're still very, very important. Place value grids can be very useful, and the place value of the digit is very important. So I'm going to get my pen ready for this lesson. So our warm-up question today is, how many questions can you think of where 17 is the answer? So think of all the different ways that you could find that. You could ask about factors, you could ask about multiples, you could do division, multiplication, subtraction, addition. How many ways can you think of to get that as your answer? And then I will share some of my questions with you after that. So just pause the video for a couple of minutes, see how many questions you can come up with where 17 is the answer. Okay, so I'm just going to show you some of the questions that I came up with to have 17 as my answer. So I've gone for the easiest one first. So I've gone for a factor pair of 17. So 1 times 17 is 17. And I know that 17 is a prime number, so they are the only two factors. I have multiplied 17 by 2 and got 34. So 34 divided by 2 is 17. Then I've done it again. 51 divided by 3 is 17 because 17 times 3 is 51. Then I've asked what is the 7th prime number. And remember we talked about how you need to memorize the first 8 prime numbers. And they are 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, which is the 7th one, and then 19. So they're the 8 ones that you need to memorize. So my question was, what is the 7th prime number? And that is 17. Then going back to what we worked on yesterday, 17,000 divided by 1,000. So think about how many place value columns that's going to move to the right. It's dividing by 1,000, so I know it's going to go 3 to the right. So my 10,000 is going to end up in my tens. My 1,000 is going to end up in my ones, and my answer is going to be 17. My last one is going back to the multiplication work we did. And I put 0.17 times 100. I know if I multiply by 100, I'm moving 2 place value columns to the left. So my my tenths column is going to go to my tens, and my hundredths column is going to go to my ones, and once again I'm going to get the answer 17. So I wonder what you came up with. Let's get rid of these. Move on to our next slide. So we're going to play a bit of countdown today. So we have played countdown before in Tiger class. I'm sure you've done it before in Leopard class as well, but I'm going to run through it just in case you're not sure of how we do it. We have a target number, which is 664, and you're going to have 6 numbers to use to try and reach that target. You can only use these numbers one time. You can't use them again. You can't use any other numbers, but you can use addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. I think I've said all 4 there. So addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Lost track of my thoughts. Yes, you can use those 4 for working out the target number of 664. So those numbers that you can use are 75, 25, 9, 2, 3 and 6. So remember, you can add them together, you can take away, you can times numbers together, and you can divide. And it is possible to get the exact answer. In fact, there are quite a few methods today to get the correct answer. I am going to tell you to pause the video for a few minutes and see if you can get that target number, or how close can you get to 664. And then I'm going to share with you one method that I used to reach that target. So pause the video now and see if you can reach that target. Okay, so I'm going to look through one of my methods. So I used the numbers and came up with a target number. So I did 6 plus 3, which is 9, plus 2, which is 11. Then I did 75 times 9, which is 675. You could have done 75 times 10 to help you work it out a bit quicker, and then which would be 750, and then taken away 75 to give you 675 to make that calculation easier. So you could have done it mentally. And then I took the answer from my two questions. So 675 take away or minus 11 is 664. So it is possible to get that exactly. And I know there are a number of other methods. If you've got them, well done. So we're going to move on to our 4 warm-up questions. So once again, I'm not going to talk these through until after. So have a go at those 4 questions. 6 times 100. List the factors of 20, which means which numbers times together to give 20. I'll give you a clue. 1 times 20 is 20. What other factors are there? Is 100 a factor of 500? How do you know? 7,000 is how many times greater than 70? So 70 times what is 7,000? So pause the video, a couple of minutes, answer those questions, and then I'll go through them. Okay, so let's have a look at these. So we've got 6 times 100. I know if I times by 100, my digits are going to move 2 columns to the left in my place value columns, and I'm going to end up with 600. Then I have to list the factors of 20. We always talked about 1, so 1 times 20 is 20. 2, so that would be a factor pair, 1 times 20. 2 times 10 is 20, and 4 times 5 is 20. So this is what you do if you're listing the factors. If you're writing your factor pairs, you would write them out as 1 times 20, 2 times 10, and 4 times 5. Next question is 100 a factor of 500? How do you know? So we know 100 is a factor of 500 because anything in the hundreds times table ends in 2 zeros. And I know that 100 times 5 is 500. 7,000 is how many times greater than 70? I know that if I times 70 by 100, I'm going to get 7,000 because, remember, they move 2 to the left if you times it by 100. So 2 to the left. My tens are going to end up in my thousands. These are going to move over. My ones are going to move over to my hundreds, and I'm going to end up with 7,000. So well done if you got those. These. Okay, so we're going to start looking at our learning intention for today. So looking at multiples of 10, 100, and 1,000. Before we do that, let's have a recap on what factors are. We did talk about it briefly earlier, but just written down in front of you. Factors are integers. An integer is a whole number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. They're whole numbers. 1.5 is not an integer because it is a whole number with a bit extra. So you can't have decimals or fractions when we're talking about factors. So factors are integers that multiply together to give the target number. So if I'm asking for factors of 9, 1, 3, and 9 are the factors of 9 because 1 times 9 is 9 and 3 times 3 is 9. So that's just a quick recap of factors which we looked at earlier in the year. So our first question is 342 times 20. So to help us with that, to make the question look a little bit easier, because it might look a bit complicated at the moment, we need to think about what the factors of 20 are, which we worked out earlier, are 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. So how can we use that to help us answer those questions? If we look at the factors 2 and 10, so 2 times 10 is 20, we can change that question slightly to make it a little bit easier. So we've got 342 times 20, which is the same as 342 times 2, then times 10. So 342 times 2 is 684 because 2 times 2 is 4, 40 times 2 is 80, and 300 times 2 is 600, which gives us this. And then we can do 684 times 10, which will give us 6,840, because remember, when you times by 10, everything moves over one place value column to the left. Thousands, the hundreds go to the thousands, the tens go to the hundreds, the ones go to the tens. So everything moves over 1 to the left. You get 6,840. So when you get questions like this, have a look at it and think, how can I make this easier for myself? Because I find it a lot easier to times it by 2 and then times it by 10 rather than worrying about having to times it by 20 in one go. Some of you might find it easier to do it that way, but some of you might not. So I find it easier to times it by 2 than by 10. So we have another question here, which is 13 times 300. So just pause the video and think, how can I make that question a little bit easier for myself? What are the factors of 300? What 2 factors could I use to make that question a little bit easier? So pause it, have a quick think, write down what you think would make it easier, and then start the video again. Okay, so how can we multiply by 300? So instead of doing 13 times 300, we could do 13 times 100 times 3, or 13 times 3 times 100. So we've split that question up to make it 13 times 3. So 13 times 100 times 3. We do 13 times 100 first. We know if you're timesing by 100, you move 2 place value columns to the left. Your tens go to your thousands, your ones go to your hundreds, and you will end up with 1,300. Then you need to make sure you can complete the question by doing 1,300 or 1,300 times 3, which is 3,900. Well done if you got that. Let's go on to the next question. So using that method of making the questions a little bit easier, have a think how you can approach these questions. So how could you make 3,000 times 4 easier? How could you make 700 times 51 easier? And how could you make 12 times 600 easier? And then try and work out the answers. And then in a minute, I will go through the answers and the method with you. So pause the video, work out the answers to those questions. Okay, so let's go through these. So we've got 3,000 times 4, which is 12,000. I would have made that easier by doing, maybe we would have switched that around, or maybe not. So 3,000, you could times 4 by 3, and then times it by 1,000. So we could do this. So 3 times 1,000 times 4. So we're just making that a little bit easier by splitting it up. 4 times 3, and then times your answer by 1,000. The next one, instead of doing 700 times 51, we're going to do 51 times 100 and then times that answer by 7. So 51 times 100 is 5,100, because remember again, if you times by 100, you move it 2 place value columns to the left and get 5,100, and then you times it by 7. So if we look at the part whole model here, I know that 5,100 is made up of 5,000 and 100. So you can do 5,000 times 7 and 100 times 7 and add them together. So 5,100 times 5. So 5,000 times 7 is 35,000. And 100 times 7 is 700. Put them together, you get 35,700. So that's just another way that we can look at that question. The next question is 12 times 600. To make that a bit easier, you can do 12 times 100 and then times it by 6. 12 times 100, we know it's going to move over 2 place value columns to the left, and we're going to end up with 1,200. And then we need to times it by 6. 12 times 6 is 72, which means 1,200 times 6 is 7,200. So all the time you're looking at these questions and thinking, how can I make this easier for myself? So it looks a little bit tricky at the moment, and I like things to be easier. So how can you make it easier for yourself? Okay, so here I've put, you can pause the video now and then have a go at questions 1 to 3 on the worksheet if you want to. and then come back to the lesson, or you can watch the lesson all the way through and then tackle the worksheet. So that's up to you, but that's just put in there if you would like to tackle those questions, have a little break from the video and then come back, or you can carry on with the video. Either way, I'll still be here because you can pause me or just carry on. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next lot of questions. So the next one is 60 times what is 2,400. So let's have a think about how we can do that. We know that 6 times something is 24. And I know my 4 times tables and my 6 times tables. So I know that 6 times 4 is 24. That is 10 times greater. So 60 is 10 times greater than 6. But 2,400 is 100 times greater than 24, which means we're going to have to times this side by 10 again, so we get 100 times greater. So we're going to have two things at 10 times greater to make this 100 times greater. So we're going to have 40. So it's the same as 60 times 4 times 10, or 6 times 10 times 4 times 10. So how can you make it equal to the other side? So think about that method with these questions. So 500 times what is 35,000, and something times 60 is 360,000. How can you approach them? Okay, so I'm going to put the answers in and I'm going to talk about those. So we have 500 times 70. Let me get rid of those answers actually, and we'll go through them. So 500 times something equals 35,000. We know 5 times 7 equals 35. And if we look at how many times bigger that is 100 times bigger. That is 1,000 times bigger. So if I was to only times that by 7, it's not going to end up having this side 100 times bigger and this side 1,000 times bigger. I need to times that by 10 again. So 500 times 70 is going to be 35,000, but 500 times 7 would only be 3,500. So you need to make sure both sides balance. So this side's 1,000 times and this side's 1,000 times. I'm just going to erase all this so I can have a little bit of space for this one down here. So something times 60 is 360,000. So I'm going to look there for numbers that I recognise. So 6 times something is 36. We know that 6 times 6 equals 36. Once again, we'll see how much bigger these are. So 60 is only 10 times bigger than 6. However, 360,000 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 10,000 times bigger. So what do you times 10 by to get 10,000? Okay, so that's 1,000 times different because I've moved 3 place value columns to the left, which means this other 6 is going to have to be 1,000 times bigger than 6 so that we get the right answer. So 3,000. So made a little mistake there. Let me just rub that out. So I'm working with my 6 and 36. So I'm going to have 6,000 times 60 is 360,000, because 6 times 6 is 36. If you times that by 1,000, you get 36,000, and then if you times it by 10, you end up with 360,000. If you wanted to cheat, which is a method that you guys noticed in class, you noticed that 6 times 6 was 36, and then you noticed that there was in fact 4 zeros, and there's 4 zeros on this side. So you guys noticed that cheat method. Maybe you could use that. Okay, let's go on to the next lot. This is another opportunity for you to pause the video and have a go at those questions and then come back to it if you want a little break from the video. If not, you can carry on. Okay, so we've got 4,200 divided by 70. Let's have a look at how we can do this. So what factors of 70 will be able to help us? So we're just going to write down the factor pairs of 70. So we know that 1 times 70 is 70, 2 times 35 is 70, 5 times 14 is 70, and 7 times 10 is 70. And we know this, everything's in the 1 times table. We know it's even because it ends in a 0, so it has to be even, so it has to be in the 2s. We know it's in the 5 times tables because everything in the 5 times tables ends in a 0 or a 5. We know it's in the 7 times table because we know that 7 times 10 is 70. So which one of those are going to make it easier? I think if we times 4,200 by 7 and then 10, that's a lot easier than timesing it by any of these other ones. Because if we times it by 1 and then 70, we're just doing the same sum. If we times it by 2, that's not too bad, but then you've got to times it by 35. And if we have to times it by 5 and then 14, that's going to make it really complicated. So let's use this one. So instead of 4,200 divided by 70, we're going to do 4,200 divided by 10 and then divided by 7. So let's do that first. We know if you divide by 10, all the digits move 1 place value, words of the day, column to the right. So my thousands go to my hundreds go to my tens go to my ones. And we end up with 420. Are we finished? No, we're not, because we still need to divide by 7. We know that 42 divided by 7 is 6, because 7 times 6 is 42. But we've got 420 divided by 7. So the answer is going to be 10 times bigger, because this is 10 times bigger than that. So instead of 6, we're going to have 60. Okay, this is our last question, I believe, that we're going to look at. So we've got 56,000 divided by 8,000. How could we make that easier? So how could you change that 8,000 to make it easier for yourself? So you could do divide it by 1,000 and then divide it by 8. So what do you think the answer is going to be if you divide 56,000 by 1,000? How many columns to the right are they going to move? So if you do 56,000 divided by 1,000, you know that all these digits are going to move 3 place value columns to the right, your 10,000s to your 10s, your 1,000s to your 1s. And you're going to end up with, instead of 56,000 divided by 1,000 divided by 8, you've now got, you've done this bit, so you've got 56 divided by 8. And then you just got to think about your 8 times tables. What times 8 is 56? We know that 8 times 8 is 64. So it's got to be 7 times 8 is 56. Okay, so we've got these two, which you're going to do on your own. So pause the video. How can you make those questions easier? How can you answer them? And then we're going to get on with our worksheets. So we have 6,400 divided by 200. So to make it easier, you divide it by 100 first and then divide it by 2. So 64,000 divided by 100. Everything's going to move 2 place value columns to the right. You're going to end up with 64 divided by 2. So what is half of 64? Half of 4 is 2. Half of 60 is 30. So the answer is 32. The next question, how can you make 15,000 divided by 5,000 easier? You do 15,000 divided by 1,000 first and then divide it by 5. So if you divide 15,000 by 1,000, you know it's going to move 3 place value columns to the right. 10,000s to the 10s, 1,000s to the 1s, you're going to end up with 15 divided by 5, which means 5 times what is 15? So the answer is 3. Okay, so your activity once again has been uploaded on Teams and Tapestry. So I know there's been, at least on the first day, I don't think on the second day there was any difficulties. There was some difficulties, so we're just going to continue at the moment to upload the work on Teams and Tapestry. Thank you once again for all your hard work and for paying attention to the video, and I'll speak to you soon.